Hey everyone, so this is a video that I promised about down dog at a recent workshop I did. It was yoga therapy for happy down dog, which is actually kind of a hellish down dog, the things I make those individuals do. And it's all to increase awareness about the downward dog pose, which is not an easy pose, even though it's very important and fundamental to a lot of vinyasa and Ashtanga style and everything that derives from that, forest yoga, all kinds of power yoga, Anusara yoga, even Iyengar yoga uses down dog a lot, though not as much as Ashtanga. And so, in particular, this is about a kind of internal mapping system that facilitates awareness in all postures. This is called the spotlight imagery that I learned from David Garrigues, and I've also added to it. And I have two videos which I'll link for this video that talk about the lower body and the upper body spotlights. Essentially, and you can do your own research on exactly what these anatomy reference points are, these datums. But it's the talus, the tibial plateau, the pelvic floor, which also includes the lesser and the greater trochanter, the rim of the pelvis, essentially the iliac crest, 360. And we're looking at the plane, the horizontal plane that goes through these datums. Then the floating rib circle, which, play with it. Is it rib 12? Is it rib 10? Is it rib 9? Where is it in there? You'll find it for yourself. Essentially, it's at the T12L1 disc. First rib circle, cheekbone, soft palate, something thereabouts. You find it for yourself. You explore and you find, what is that datum? Could be the inner ear, it could be the medulla oblongata, it could be the tongue and the crown. Those are the 8. The 2 I've added are the wrist, essentially where the carpal radial joint, and the elbow joint, the top of the ulna. And so these are horizontal planes that are very, very accurate and precise. So in any pose, in particular because of the height of the video, my head would be cut off if I stood up. But I'm linking the videos that talk about this. This is focused on downward dog. So if the things that I'm saying when I talk about spotlight imagery, go back to those videos if you don't know what I'm talking about. And obviously, I'm giving away a lot of golden content right now. I mean, the spotlight imagery is just incredible. It's done so much for healing myself because it's a very precise and accurate way to align your body internally through proprioception and just through using your mind and your imagination to visualize these points on your body. That does not require necessarily a teacher to come and adjust you or correct you, tell you how to do it. You don't necessarily need some biofeedback via a mirror or pictures or video of watching yourself do yoga to be able to correct yourself. I do this imagery in every asana. In the Ashtanga system, you hold a pose for 5 to 8 breaths, depending. And in 5 breaths, I'm scanning. I go all 8 spotlights, and ideally, though I won't extend the pose if I don't get to it in time, but ideally, I usually start at the ankle. I'll go the ankle up to the crown and back down to the ankle. Sometimes I'll start in some middle place. Let's say I start at the floating rib circle, and then I'll go up or down, And if I have time in the 5 breath span, which is somewhere between 15 and 30 seconds, depending on how fast you're breathing, I'll add in the radiocarpal joint and the elbow joint. Okay, so we're going to talk about down dog, and we're going to do it super fast because it took me, whatever this is, 3-4 minutes to even get to this point. The first thing that I'd like to specify is the difference between tension and compression, which I've learned from Paul Grilly. And so, because downward dog, so I'll quickly demonstrate the downward dog pose. It's kind of an inverted pyramid. I don't want weight resting on my heel. I want my heels just barely kissing the mat, which means I'll constantly, as my flexibility changes, I'll constantly be adjusting. I don't want my heels way off the ground. If I had a tight Achilles, I might step in closer. But that puts more load on the shoulders. So maybe, I play with it. I could put a wedge under my heels if I know that I'm doing a lot of down dogs, lots of sun salutes. But I also don't want all my weight in my heels. That's stretching muscles, especially to go on the outer side of the leg, and it takes a lot out of the benefit for the Achilles and the benefit for the back of the knee joint. But to be able to get the heel down is different for everybody. So the way you find this is in a forward lunge. And I'm not doing the lunge to stretch anything. I'm doing it to investigate the range of motion in my ankle. So as I go forward, I feel the sensation around my ankle. I don't feel anything here. I don't feel anything here. Right here, I start to feel in the front, the side of the angle, the side of the joint that's closing. So that means that I have compression. If I were to feel it in the back, that means I have tension. It's a muscular or connective tissue that is being stretched. Tension, if I felt it back here, tension can be lessened or it can be lengthened. Stretching will help that. Yoga will increase range of motion. If compression is being felt, then don't push any further. Those are bones or connective tissues that are compressing on the closing side of the joint, and to push hard there could cause injury. So, but notice I have a pretty big angle here. Some people are back here. Some people go way further. Typically, Asian people can go generally very deep on the ankle joint. So that's going to dictate how far back my feet can be from my hands, but my heel's still touching the ground. If I go too far back, my heels start to come up. Okay, so when you're doing the downward dog pose, you're running through the spotlight imagery. Generally, in the down dog, if I'm not starting at the talus, which is the ankle bone, then I'll start at the pelvic floor. Because we're forming two straight lines ideally. From my wrists to my pelvic floor is one line, and then from my heels or my talus bone to my pelvic floor is another line. I don't want to make three lines. What tends to happen if you're not flexible, or rather a line and an arc. So you'll see an arc. I'll just slip this off just in case you can't see. So ideally it's two lines, which almost feels like a back bend. I'm really lifting the tailbone towards the sky, while at the same time focusing on a tucking of the tailbone towards my navel. So they're opposing forces. But I want that straight line from my wrist to my tailbone. What will happen with limited flexibility is you'll see a rounding or a flexion of the spine. And so it becomes one line from heel to tailbone and then some kind of arc in the back. And with limited flexibility that might happen. But I really want to aim to disappear the spine. So I don't want any spinal protrusions, any bones sticking out of my spine as I am doing the pose. So if I need to lift the heels or if I need to bend the knees so that I can hide the lumbar spine, then I'll do that. And I'm pushing out through the hands. And if you were at the workshop in Albuquerque, there's a pulling sensation. So I want an engagement of my hip flexors. That naturally happens as I do the spotlight imagery. Ankle, talus, tibial plateau to the pelvic floor. Because of the angle that happens between the pelvic floor and the rim of the pelvis, this angle relative to the lower limb, the visualization of all four of these simultaneously will naturally engage the hip flexors. Then, when you combine with that the floating rib circle with the rim of the pelvis and the floor of the pelvis, that will naturally engage the lower abdominals, especially lower rectus and transverse abdominis, which was a lot to do with that Yoga Therapy for Happy Down Dogs event. So as I do the pose, I choose a spotlight to begin at. You play with it yourself. I only have my own experience to go off of. And in my experience, I always start at the talus bone or whatever's coming up for me. Let's say there's especially strong sensations around one of the spotlights like the pelvic floor, then I might start at the pelvic floor. And then I run through the spotlights in my own mind, and the spotlight imagery is a horizontal plane, maybe a circle you could say, like a spotlight would be. And I imagine the next spotlight, like I'm looking towards it. So if I start at the talus, and then I go to the tibial plateau, I use my mind's eye, my imagination, to look up towards the tibial plateau. And then from the tibial plateau, I look up towards the pelvic floor, and then up towards the rim of the pelvis, and so on. And, but I do it fluidly, because I'm following the breath. The breath is more important than the imagery, but the imagery will help make subtle adjustments in your own body. So, also, just like in the workshop, I'd like to emphasize the hand bandha, which is a subtle activation in the web space between the first finger and the thumb. An extension big extension through the fingers, not grippy fingers, but extending. And especially an aliveness in the full length of the fingers, especially the first finger and the thumb, all the way through. Maybe you turn the hands out a little bit to alleviate any wrist pressure you might be having. You want most of the weight to fall on the inside of the wrist joint, which is a joint. The outside is not a joint. So I'll quickly describe as I'm doing the spotlights. I don't know, maybe you'll be able to see my body adjust. I don't know if it will or not, but this will just be the conclusion of the video. So right there, I started the floating rib. That's where my mind went to. And then I go up to the first rib circle, and then to the tongue soft palate region, and the crown. Simultaneously at the tongue soft palate region, I go to my elbow spotlight and my wrist spotlight, and then back down immediately. Wrist, elbow, first rib, floating rib, rim of the pelvis, pelvic floor. And then there's an angle, so maybe about a 90-degree angle from my pelvis line down the leg. So I go to the tibial plateau, and I just made an adjustment because of that, because I want my kneecaps facing the same direction. And that might mean my feet do not face the same direction, because there's a phenomenon called tibial torsion. And then I go down to the talus, and then back up. Talus, tibial plateau, floor of the pelvis, rim of the pelvis, first ribs, floating rib circle, first rib circle, elbow, wrist, soft palate, crown. So I hope you find that helpful, and definitely comment below any questions. I know, that was a 2-hour event, and I just gave you, in summary, the conclusion of the event. So any questions, comment below, and definitely subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I hope to hear from you. See you next time. Namaste.